When I found myself sleeping in my car outside a gas station, clutching the last photo I had of my family, I realized how far I'd fallen. My wife, Linda, had taken everything in the divorce. My house, my savings, even my daughter's trust. But nothing hurt more than the day I saw her laughing with my former best friend, the man I once called my brother. They thought they'd broken me for good, but what happened next would change all our lives forever. Before I tell you what happened next, hit like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments from which city you're watching. Your support means more than you know. I used to believe in the American dream. I worked hard, paid my taxes, and built a life from nothing. My name is David, and for most of my adult life, I was a husband, a father, and a small business owner. I ran a modest auto repair shop in a quiet Ohio suburb, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and neighbors brought you pies at Thanksgiving. My wife, Linda, was the heart of our home. Smart, beautiful, and fiercely protective of our daughter, Grace. We'd been married for 18 years, and I thought we were solid. Sure, we had our share of family drama and the usual ups and downs, but I never imagined betrayal could come from the people I loved most. Grace was our only child, a bright, sensitive girl who loved animals and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. She was the glue that held us together, especially when Linda and I argued about money or the future. I always thought we'd work things out. I trusted Linda with everything, my heart, my secrets, my life. I trusted my best friend, Mark, too. We'd grown up together, survived high school, college, and even started our first jobs side by side. He was Uncle Mark to Grace, always there for birthdays and holidays, always ready with a joke or a helping hand. But looking back, I can see the cracks that were forming. Linda started working late, claiming she had to help her sister with her new baby. She was on her phone more, texting in the bathroom, laughing at messages she wouldn't share. Mark started dropping by the house when I wasn't home, saying he was checking on Grace or helping Linda with the yard. I wanted to believe the best. I wanted to trust them. But trust, I learned, is a fragile thing in a toxic relationship. The first real sign that something was wrong came on a rainy Thursday. I came home early, hoping to surprise Linda with her favorite takeout. The house was quiet, too quiet. I found her in the kitchen, startled, shoving her phone into her pocket. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That night, I found a strange cologne on her jacket, one I didn't wear. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid. But the doubts started to grow. Grace became distant, spending more time in her room, barely speaking at dinner. I tried to reach out, but she pulled away. "Mom says you're always working," she said one night, her voice cold. "She says you don't care about us anymore." That cut deeper than any argument. I tried to talk to Linda, but she brushed me off, saying I was imagining things, that I was jealous and controlling. The emotional storytelling of our marriage had turned into a silent war. One Saturday, Mark called, asking if I wanted to grab a beer. I almost said yes, but something in his voice made me pause. I told him I was busy, then drove past his house later that night. Linda's car was parked in his driveway. I sat there for an hour, watching the lights flicker in his living room, feeling my world unravel. I didn't confront them, not yet. I needed proof. I needed to know for sure. The next week, I started noticing little things. Receipts for dinners I hadn't attended, a hotel key card in Linda's purse, Grace's sudden coldness toward me. I felt like a stranger in my own home, a ghost haunting the life I'd built. The family drama was suffocating. I started sleeping on the couch, telling myself it was just a rough patch, that we'd get through it. But deep down, I knew something was broken. Then came the night that changed everything. I came home late from the shop, exhausted and covered in grease. The house was dark, but I heard voices upstairs, Linda and Mark laughing softly. I crept up the stairs, my heart pounding, and saw them through the crack in the bedroom door. They were sitting on the bed, holding hands, their faces close. I felt sick, betrayed, humiliated. I wanted to burst in, to scream, to demand answers. But I just stood there, frozen, watching the people I loved most destroy everything we'd built. I left the house that night, driving aimlessly through the rain, my mind racing. I thought about calling Grace, about telling her everything, but how could I destroy her world the way mine had just been destroyed? I ended up at a cheap motel, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the past year, searching for signs I'd missed. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't face anyone. I couldn't face myself. I spent the day in that motel room, alternating between rage and despair. How could Linda do this to me? How could Mark betray me? I thought about confronting them, about beating the truth out of Mark, but what good would that do? The damage was done. I went home that night, hoping it had all been a nightmare. But Linda was waiting for me, her eyes red, her hands trembling. She tried to explain, to justify, to beg for forgiveness. I couldn't listen. I packed a bag and left, not knowing where I was going, just knowing I couldn't stay. I slept in my car for 3 nights, too ashamed to call anyone, too broken to care. I thought about ending it all, about driving off a bridge, but something kept me going. Maybe it was anger. Perhaps it was the need for justice. Maybe it was the thought of Grace, of the family I'd lost. But as I sat in that car, staring at the darkness, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let Linda and Mark destroy everything I'd built. If they wanted to play games, I'd show them how the game was really played. That was the night I decided to fight back. But I had no idea that the real twist in my story was still to come. I wish I could say that the worst was over after I left. But the truth is, the real pain was just beginning. The days that followed were a blur of numbness and disbelief. I drifted from one cheap motel to another, living out of a duffel bag, my phone buzzing with messages I couldn't bring myself to read. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Linda's face, heard Mark's laugh, felt the sting of betrayal all over again. The world I'd built, my marriage, my family, my friendships, had collapsed in a single night, and I was left sifting through the rubble, trying to find something worth saving. The divorce papers arrived 2 weeks later, delivered by a courier who looked at me with pity. Linda didn't even have the decency to call. She'd already changed the locks on the house, frozen our joint accounts, and told Grace I'd abandoned them. The legal language was cold and clinical, but the message was clear. I was being erased from my own life. She wanted the house, the car, full custody of Grace, and spousal support. I stared at the papers, my hands shaking, rage and heartbreak warring inside me. This wasn't just a toxic relationship, it was a full-scale family drama, and I was the villain in Linda's story. I tried to call Grace, desperate to explain, but she wouldn't answer. When I finally reached her at school, she sounded distant, her voice flat. "Mom says you left us, Dad. She says you're with someone else." I tried to tell her the truth, but she hung up before I could finish. That was the moment I realized how completely Linda had turned her against me. The betrayal wasn't just between husband and wife. It was between father and daughter, too. Mark, for his part, disappeared. He stopped answering my calls, blocked me on social media, and even quit his job at the same company where we'd worked side by side for years. I heard through the grapevine that he'd moved in with Linda, that they were playing house in the home I'd built, sleeping in the bed I'd paid for, eating at the table where I'd once carved Grace's initials. The humiliation was complete. My friends, unsure of what to believe, started to drift away. Some sided with Linda, others just stopped calling. I was alone, truly alone, for the first time in my life. The legal battle was brutal. Linda's lawyer was ruthless, painting me as an absent, unstable father who'd abandoned his family for a younger woman. The judge seemed to buy every word. My own lawyer, a tired man with too many cases and not enough time, told me to settle. "You're not going to win this, David. Take what you can get and move on." But I couldn't move on. Not yet. Not when everything I'd worked for was being stolen from me. The day the divorce was finalized, I sat in the courthouse parking lot, staring at the decree. I'd lost the house, the car, most of my savings, and worst of all, I'd lost Grace. I was allowed supervised visits twice a month, but Linda made sure those visits were awkward and painful. Grace barely spoke to me, her eyes full of hurt and confusion. I tried to reach her, to explain, but the wall between us grew higher every time I tried. I started drinking more, numbing the pain with cheap whiskey and late-night TV. My business suffered. Customers stopped coming, rumors spreading that I was unstable, unreliable. I couldn't blame them. I was a shell of the man I'd been, haunted by memories of a life that no longer existed. The family drama had become my entire world, and I was losing the battle. One night, after another failed attempt to see Grace, I found myself parked outside my old house. The lights were on, laughter spilling out through the open windows. I saw Linda and Mark in the kitchen, cooking dinner together, moving around each other like they'd been doing it for years. Grace sat at the table, her face lit by the glow of her phone, oblivious to the man watching from the darkness. I felt like a ghost, invisible and forgotten. That was the night I hit rock bottom. I drove to the edge of town, parked by the river, and stared at the water for hours. I thought about ending it all, about letting the current take me away. But something stopped me. A memory of Grace as a little girl, her arms wrapped around my neck, whispering, "Don't ever leave me, Daddy." I couldn't leave her. Not like this. Not without fighting for the truth. I made a promise to myself that night. I would find a way to expose Linda and Mark for what they'd done. I would reclaim my life, my dignity, and my daughter's love. I didn't know how, but I knew I couldn't give up. The betrayal had nearly destroyed me, but it had also given me a new purpose. I was going to get justice, no matter what it took. I started digging into their lives, searching for any weakness, any secret I could use. What I uncovered next would set the stage for a revenge they'd never see coming. The days after that night by the river were the darkest of my life, but they were also the beginning of something new. I was done being the victim in this family drama. I was done letting Linda and Mark write the story of my downfall. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one. I just needed a plan and the strength to see it through. I started by getting sober. It wasn't easy. Every night, the urge to drown my pain in a bottle was almost overwhelming. But I forced myself to remember why I was doing this. I wanted my daughter to see her real father, not the broken man Linda had painted me to be. I wanted justice, not just for myself, but for Grace, who deserved to know the truth about the toxic relationships that had torn our family apart. I moved into a small, run-down apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I got a second job at a warehouse, working nights to pay the bills and keep my mind busy. The work was hard, but it gave me time to think, to plan, to rebuild the pieces of my life that Linda and Mark had tried to destroy. I started keeping a journal, writing down every memory, every detail, every suspicion. I needed to see the pattern, to understand how they'd managed to fool everyone, including me. I began to notice things I'd missed before. Linda's spending habits had changed drastically in the months leading up to the divorce. She'd opened new credit cards, made large withdrawals from our joint account, and started buying expensive gifts for Grace. Gifts I knew I hadn't paid for. Mark, too, had suddenly come into money. He'd bought a new car, started wearing designer clothes, and even taken Linda and Grace on a weekend trip to Chicago. I realized they'd been planning this for months, maybe even years. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. I started gathering evidence. I went through old bank statements, credit card bills, and emails. I found receipts for hotel rooms, dinners, and gifts that Linda had tried to hide. I even found a hidden folder on our old computer, filled with photos and messages between her and Mark. The more I uncovered, the angrier I became. This wasn't just an affair. It was a calculated attack on my life, my reputation, and my relationship with my daughter. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I reached out to an old friend, Tom, who worked as a private investigator. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I told him what had happened, he agreed to help. Tom was relentless. He followed Linda and Mark, took photos, recorded conversations, and dug up information I never would have found on my own. Within weeks, we had a mountain of evidence, enough to prove not only the affair, but also financial fraud, parental alienation, and even potential abuse of Grace's trust fund. But the real breakthrough came one night when Tom called me, his voice urgent. "David, you need to see this." He sent me a video, grainy but clear enough to recognize the faces. It was Linda and Mark arguing in a parking lot. Mark was shouting, waving his arms while Linda tried to calm him down. Suddenly, Mark shoved her hard. She stumbled, nearly falling. The look on her face was pure fear. Tom had caught it all on camera. I watched the video over and over, my anger turning to something colder, more focused. This was the leverage I needed, not just to expose their affair, but to show the world who they really were. I started to see the path forward. Not just revenge, but justice. I would use their own secrets to bring them down, to reclaim my life, and to protect Grace from the toxic family conflict that had poisoned our home. But I knew I had to be careful. Linda and Mark were cunning, and they'd already proven they were willing to do whatever it took to get what they wanted. I couldn't confront them directly. Not yet. I needed to build my case, to make sure every piece of evidence was airtight. I started working with a lawyer, a tough, no-nonsense woman named Carla. who specialized in family law and had a reputation for exposing liars and cheaters. She believed me, and more importantly, she believed in justice. Together, we started building a case. Carla filed motions to reopen the custody agreement, citing new evidence of parental alienation and financial misconduct. She subpoenaed bank records, phone logs, and even Grace's school counselor, who testified about the sudden change in Grace's behavior after the divorce. The more we dug, the more we found. Linda and Mark had left a trail of lies and deceit a mile wide. But the hardest part was seeing Grace. Every time I saw her, she looked more withdrawn, more lost. She barely spoke to me, her eyes full of hurt and confusion. I tried to reach her, to explain, but Linda had poisoned her against me. I knew I had to be patient, to let the truth come out in its own time. I wrote her letters, telling her how much I loved her, how none of this was her fault, how I would always be there for her no matter what. I didn't know if she read them, but I had to try. The weeks turned into months. The legal battle dragged on, but I refused to give up. Every day, I reminded myself why I was fighting. Not just for revenge, but for justice, for my daughter, for the chance to rebuild my life. I started to feel stronger, more focused. The pain was still there, but it was no longer the center of my world. I was taking control, one step at a time. Then, one night, as I was leaving work, a stranger approached me in the parking lot. He was well-dressed, carrying a briefcase, his face serious but kind. "Are you David?" he asked. I nodded, wary. "My name is Richard Evans. I'm an attorney from New York. I need to speak with you about your great-uncle's estate." I stared at him, confused. "I don't have a great-uncle in New York." He smiled, handing me a business card. "You do, and he's just left you something that could change your life forever." I had no idea that the next words out of Richard's mouth would turn my world upside down and give me the ultimate weapon in my fight for justice. Richard Evans stood in the flickering light of the parking lot, his tailored suit and calm demeanor so out of place in my world of late-night shifts and broken dreams that I almost laughed. But there was something in his eyes, an intensity, a certainty that made me pause. He handed me a thick envelope, embossed with a law firm's name I'd never heard of. "Your great-uncle, Samuel Whitaker, passed away last month," he said quietly. "You've been named as the primary beneficiary of his estate. I need you to come to New York to discuss the details in person." I stared at him, the words barely registering. "This is a mistake," I said. "I don't have any family left. My parents are gone. I never even met a Samuel Whitaker." Richard shook his head. "He knew about you, David. He's been following your life for years. He left very specific instructions. You need to hear them in person. And you need to come within the next 48 hours, or the estate will pass to an alternate beneficiary." I almost walked away. It sounded like a scam, another cruel joke from the universe. But something in Richard's voice, steady, professional, almost compassionate, made me hesitate. "What kind of estate?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked me in the eye. "It's substantial. Over 47 million plus property and investments. But there are conditions. You'll need to hear them for yourself." I felt dizzy, the world tilting beneath my feet. For months I'd been scraping by, fighting for scraps of dignity. And now a stranger was telling me I might be a millionaire. I wanted to believe it was real. But after everything Linda and Mark had done, trust didn't come easily. Still, I took the envelope, my hands trembling. "I'll come," I said, my voice hoarse. "But if this is some kind of trick..." "It's not," Richard said, his tone gentle. "I'll arrange your flight. We'll take care of everything." That night, I barely slept. My mind raced with questions, doubts, and a flicker of hope I hadn't felt in months. I thought about Grace, about the life I'd lost, about the revenge I'd been planning. If this were real, if I really were about to inherit a fortune, I could finally turn the tables on Linda and Mark. I could fight for my daughter, clear my name, and rebuild everything they'd tried to destroy. The idea of justice, real, undeniable justice, burned in my chest. The next morning, I packed my few belongings and met Richard at the airport. The flight to New York was surreal. I watched the city lights flicker below as we landed, my heart pounding with anticipation and fear. Richard led me to a sleek black car, and we drove through the city in silence, the weight of what was coming pressing down on me. We arrived at a towering glass building overlooking Central Park. Richard led me to a penthouse suite, its walls lined with books and art, the kind of place I'd only seen in movies. Waiting for me was a team of lawyers, all polite smiles and crisp suits. They explained the terms of the will. My great-uncle had left me everything, but there was a catch. I had to use a portion of the inheritance to help others, specifically to support families torn apart by betrayal and toxic relationships. The rest was mine, free and clear. I sat in stunned silence as they showed me the documents, the bank statements, the deeds to properties I'd never heard of. It was real, all of it. For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside me. A sense of power, of possibility. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a man with resources, with options, with a chance to rewrite my story. As I signed the papers, Richard leaned in, his voice low. Your great-uncle believed in second chances. He wanted you to have the means to fight for what's right, to get justice, to help others who've been through what you have. I nodded, my mind already racing with plans. I could hire the best lawyers, the best investigators. I could expose Linda and Mark for who they really were. I could fight for Grace, for my reputation, for every piece of my life they'd tried to steal. The revenge I dreamed of was finally within reach. But I knew I had to be smart. I couldn't just throw money at the problem. I needed a strategy, a way to use my new resources to turn the tide without tipping my hand too soon. I met with Carla, my lawyer, and Tom, my investigator, laying out everything I'd learned, everything I'd been given. Together, we crafted a plan. First, we gathered every piece of evidence, photos, videos, financial records, witness statements. We built a case so airtight that even Linda's ruthless attorney couldn't poke holes in it. Then, we started quietly, reaching out to people Linda and Mark had wronged. Old friends, former co-workers, even neighbors who'd seen things they hadn't understood at the time. We collected statements, built a timeline, and prepared for the day we'd take it all public. But the real key was Grace. I knew I couldn't win her back with money or legal battles. I had to show her the truth, to let her see for herself who her mother and Mark really were. I started writing her letters again, this time including small pieces of evidence, photos, messages, memories only we shared. I told her about the inheritance, about my promise to use it for good, about my hope that one day she'd understand why I'd fought so hard. The weeks passed in a blur of meetings, phone calls, and late-night strategy sessions. Every day, I felt myself growing stronger, more focused. The pain of betrayal was still there, but it was no longer the center of my world. I was taking control, one step at a time. Then, one afternoon, Carla called me with news that changed everything. David, we have enough. It's time to make our move. The stage was set. The evidence was ready. All that remained was to pull the trigger and watch as Linda and Mark's carefully constructed lies came crashing down. The day of reckoning arrived with a cold, clear sky. A kind of poetic justice, I thought, for the storm that was about to break over Linda and Mark's heads. Carla and Tom had orchestrated every detail, and I was ready. For months, I'd dreamed of this moment. The day I would finally reclaim my life, expose the betrayal, and show Grace the truth about her mother and the man who'd pretended to be my friend. We started with the legal assault. Carla filed a motion to reopen the custody case, submitting our mountain of evidence: the financial fraud, the hidden accounts, the video of Mark shoving Linda, and the proof of their affair. She included statements from neighbors who'd seen Mark's car parked overnight while I was away, and from Grace's school counselor, who described the sudden change in my daughter's behavior. The judge, who'd once looked at me with skepticism, now read through the documents with a furrowed brow. "This is serious," he said, glancing at Linda's attorney. "We'll need to investigate these claims thoroughly." But that was just the beginning. Tom had arranged for a local reporter, someone with a reputation for exposing family drama and toxic relationships, to receive an anonymous tip. Within days, the story was everywhere. Local woman's affair with husband's best friend exposed. Custody battle erupts. The article didn't name names, but in a town as small as ours, everyone knew who it was about. The whispers started at the grocery store, the gas station, even at Grace's school. Linda and Mark couldn't go anywhere without feeling the weight of 100 eyes on them. I watched from a distance as their world began to unravel. Mark lost his job after his boss read the article and saw the evidence of financial misconduct. Linda's bakery, once the heart of our community, saw business dry up overnight. Friends who'd once sided with her now kept their distance, unsure what to believe. The justice I'd craved for so long was finally being served, and it was more satisfying than I'd ever imagined. But the hardest part was still ahead. Grace. I knew she was hurting, confused, and angry. She'd been caught in the crossfire of our toxic family conflict, and I didn't want to make things worse. I waited until the dust had settled, then asked Carla to arrange a meeting with the court-appointed counselor. Grace agreed to see me, though her eyes were wary, her posture guarded. We met in a quiet room at the counselor's office. I brought the letters I'd written, the photos, and the evidence. Everything I'd collected to show her the truth. I didn't want to overwhelm her, so I started slow, telling her how much I loved her, how none of this was her fault, how I'd fought every day to be worthy of being her father. She listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. When I finally handed her the folder, she hesitated, then opened it, and she read in silence for a long time. When she finally looked up, her eyes were full of pain, but also understanding. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered. "I wanted to protect you," I said, my voice breaking. "I didn't want you to hate your mother. I just wanted you to know the truth." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I don't hate her, but I want to live with you, Dad. I want to start over." The court agreed. With the evidence we'd provided, the judge granted me full custody. Linda was ordered to attend counseling and pay restitution for the money she'd stolen from Grace's trust. Mark, disgraced and unemployed, left town within a week. The house, once filled with laughter and love, was sold. The proceeds split between Linda and me. I used my share to buy a new home for Grace and me, a fresh start, free from the shadows of the past. But the real victory wasn't in the money or the legal wins. It was in the quiet moments. Grace hugging me goodnight, the two of us cooking dinner together, laughing over old memories. The family drama that had nearly destroyed us had become the foundation for something stronger, something real. And as for the inheritance, I kept my promise to my great-uncle. I used a portion of the money to start a foundation for families torn apart by betrayal and toxic relationships. We offered counseling, legal aid, and support for parents fighting to rebuild their lives. I met people who'd been through the same hell I had, and together, we found a way to heal. Linda tried to reach out a few times, but I kept my distance. I'd forgiven her, but I couldn't forget. The wounds were too deep, the trust too broken. Mark never contacted me again. I heard he'd moved to another state, trying to start over. I wished him luck, but I didn't waste any more time thinking about him. The revenge I'd planned had turned into something more, a chance to help others, to find justice, to rebuild my life on my own terms. The pain of betrayal would always be a part of my story, but it no longer defined me. I was stronger, wiser, and finally at peace. But just when I thought the past was behind me, a letter arrived in the mail. One that would force me to confront everything I thought I'd left behind. The letter arrived on a gray, rainy afternoon, the kind of day that always made me restless. It was addressed in a careful, looping script I didn't recognize. For a moment, I considered tossing it aside. After all, I'd had enough surprises for a lifetime. But something about the weight of the envelope, the way my name was written, David Whitaker, not just David, made me pause. I sat at the kitchen table, Grace humming softly in the next room as she worked on her college applications. The house was quiet, filled with the kind of peace I'd once thought impossible. I opened the envelope, my hands steady, my heart oddly calm. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The photo was old, black and white, showing a young man in a military uniform standing beside a woman with a gentle smile. On the back, in faded ink, was written, "Samuel and Margaret, 1952, for the family we never met." The letter was from a woman named Evelyn, a distant cousin I'd never heard of. She explained that she'd been contacted by the same law firm that had handled my great-uncle's estate. She'd received a small inheritance, along with a request to reach out to me to share the story of our family's beginnings, and to remind me that even in the darkest times, we are never truly alone. Evelyn wrote about Samuel's early years, how he'd survived the war, lost everything, and rebuilt his life from nothing. She wrote about Margaret, who'd taught in a one-room schoolhouse and believed in the power of kindness. They'd struggled, but they'd never given up. Our family's legacy isn't money or property, Evelyn wrote. It's resilience. It's the ability to start over, to forgive, to help others even when we're hurting. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. I thought about everything I'd been through, the betrayal, the revenge, the justice served. I thought about Linda and Mark, about the toxic relationships that had nearly destroyed me. I thought about Grace, about the nights I'd spent wondering if I'd ever see her smile again. And I realized that Evelyn was right. The real inheritance wasn't the $47 million or the new house, or even the foundation I'd started. It was the strength to keep going, to rebuild, to choose compassion over bitterness. That night, I told Grace the story of Samuel and Margaret. We sat by the fire, the rain tapping against the windows, and I watched her eyes light up as she listened. "You know, Dad," she said, "I think you're a lot like him. You never gave up on us. You never stopped fighting for what was right." Her words filled me with a quiet pride. For the first time in years, I felt whole. The family drama, the betrayal, the revenge. It was all part of a larger story, one that stretched back generations and would continue long after I was gone. In the months that followed, the foundation grew. We helped dozens of families find their footing after divorce, betrayal, and loss. I spoke at community centers, sharing my story, hoping to give others the courage to fight for their own justice. Grace volunteered on weekends, working with kids who'd been caught in the crossfire of their parents' battles. We found healing, not just for ourselves, but for others who needed it most. Linda, for her part, faded from our lives. She moved to a new city, started over, and eventually reached out to apologize. I listened, accepted her apology, but kept my distance. Some wounds heal, but the scars remain. A reminder of what we've survived. Mark never resurfaced. Sometimes I wondered what had become of him, but I didn't dwell on it. My focus was on the future, on Grace, on the families we helped, on the life I'd rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. Looking back, I realized that revenge had been my fuel, but forgiveness was my freedom. Justice had been served, but it was compassion that set me free. The toxic family drama that had once defined me was now just a chapter in a much larger story. A story of resilience, redemption, and hope. And just when I thought I'd found peace, a knock at the door reminded me that life's greatest lessons often come when we least expect them. The knock at the door was soft, almost hesitant, but in the quiet of our new home, it echoed like a thunderclap. Grace looked up from her laptop, curiosity flickering in her eyes. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and made my way to the front door, my heart beating a little faster. After everything we'd been through, I'd learned to expect the unexpected. When I opened the door, I found a young woman standing on the porch, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, a nervous smile on her face. She looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. She held a folder in her hands, clutching it to her chest like a shield. "Mr. Whitaker?" she asked, her voice trembling just a bit. "Yes, that's me," I replied, searching her face for a clue. She took a deep breath. "My name is Anna. I'm your niece. My mother was your half-sister, Rachel. She passed away last year. I found your name in some of her things, along with a letter from your great-uncle's attorney. I hope it's okay that I came." For a moment, I was speechless. I'd known about Rachel, but we'd lost touch decades ago, after a falling out in the family that I'd always regretted but never dared to mend. Seeing Anna standing there, so much of Rachel in her eyes, I felt a wave of emotion I hadn't expected. "Of course it's okay," I said, stepping aside to let her in. "Please, come in." Grace appeared in the hallway, her eyes wide with surprise. I introduced her to Anna, and the three of us sat in the living room, the rain still tapping gently at the windows. Anna opened the folder and pulled out a stack of letters, old, yellowed, written in my mother's careful script. She handed them to me, her hands shaking. "I thought you should have these," she said softly. "They're from your mother to my mom. She kept them all these years." I turned the pages slowly, reading words I hadn't seen in decades, My mother's voice came alive in those letters, her hopes, her regrets, her love for the family she'd tried so hard to hold together. Tears stung my eyes as I realized how much I'd missed. How many chances for reconciliation had slipped through my fingers. Anna told us about her life, how she'd grown up hearing stories about me, about the family drama that had kept us apart, about the kindness my mother had shown her when she was a child. She'd struggled after Rachel's death, feeling alone in the world, until she found the letter from the attorney and decided to find me. As we talked, I felt something shift inside me, a sense of closure, of healing that I hadn't known I needed. The toxic relationships, the betrayals, the years of silence, they all faded in the warmth of this unexpected reunion. Grace listened intently, asking questions, her curiosity and compassion shining through. I saw in her the best of our family, the resilience, the hope, the willingness to forgive. That evening, after Anna left, Grace and I sat together in the quiet, the letters spread out on the coffee table between us. "You know, Dad," she said, her voice gentle, "maybe this is what your great-uncle wanted all along. Not just for you to find justice or revenge, but to bring the family back together, to heal what was broken." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep in my bones. The inheritance, the foundation, the battles I'd fought, they were all part of a larger story, one that was still being written. I realized then that the real legacy wasn't money or property, but the connections we make, the forgiveness we offer, the love we choose to give, even when it's hard. In the months that followed, Anna became a regular part of our lives. She helped at the foundation, bringing new ideas and a fresh perspective. Grace thrived in her new school, her laughter filling the house once more. I found peace in the simple things: morning coffee, long walks, quiet evenings with the people I loved. The family drama that had once threatened to destroy me had, in the end, given me a new beginning. I'd learned that justice isn't always about revenge, that healing takes time, and that sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to start over. If this story touched your heart, please hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs hope. Tell us in the comments from which city you're watching. And remember, no matter how broken things seem, there's always a way forward. Thank you for being part of this journey, and for believing, like I do, that every family can find its way back to love.